My son handed me a scarf and muttered, "Hide that aging face." But everything changed the moment they finally revealed the birthday cake. May noticed the balloons before she noticed the scarf. A cluster of bright colors hovering in the corner of the living room like they belonged to someone else's celebration, not hers. The green one in the middle kept bumping against the yellow, nudged by the lazy breeze from the ceiling fan, squeaking in tiny complaints that made her think of restless children in church. 80 years, she thought, watching those colors shiver above the old sofa. 80 years and people still believed balloons could hold back time. The smell of butter and sugar floated from the kitchen, thick and sweet, wrapping itself around the scent of furniture polish and the faint medicinal note of the ointment. She'd rubbed into her knees that morning. Somewhere in the hallway, a phone chimed with a message, and then his footsteps came, heavy and impatient, like always. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. Darius filled a doorway the way a storm filled the sky, bringing with him a rush of energy that didn't match the slow afternoon. He had his sleeves rolled up and his jaw clenched, his eyes darker than usual. In his hands he held the scarf, bunched up like he'd wrestled it into submission, soft wool in dusty rose and cream. The kind of color she would have chosen years ago when she still bothered to match lipstick to sweaters. Now her lipstick sat untouched in a drawer, and the scarf looked like it had come from some stranger's life. He stopped in front of her, the old floorboard under his left heel giving that familiar protesting creak, and for a heartbeat she thought he was finally going to sit down and simply talk to her the way he used to when he was small and the world was big and confusing and she knew how to make it less scary. Instead, he thrust the scarf toward her, his brow furrowed like he was angry with the knit pattern itself. "Here," he said, his voice rough from too much coffee and not enough sleep. "Cover up your old face." The words dropped into the space between them like a dish shattering on tile. May felt them hit, sharp and bright, and somewhere inside her chest something flinched. It wasn't that she hadn't heard jokes about her age before. She'd made most of them herself, tossing out lines to make other people comfortable with the way her hair had gone silver and her hands had turned into a map of rivers and valleys. But coming from him, from the boy she'd once walked to kindergarten, in shoes 2 sizes too big, the words scraped across tender places she didn't know were still exposed. She did not reach for the scarf. Instead, she leaned back against the sofa, feeling the cushion sigh beneath her weight, and studied her son's face. The tightness around his mouth, the way his eyes kept sliding away from hers for a fraction of a second, as if they were touching something too bright. He looked like he wanted to fight with someone, and had chosen the nearest available opponent. Over his shoulder, she could see her granddaughter's purple backpack thrown on the armchair, one strap dangling toward the floor, a math workbook peeking out. There were voices in the kitchen, hurried whispers and the clink of plates. The house was dressed for celebration, but the air around Darius's shoulders felt like bad weather. "Old is old," May said quietly, refusing to let her voice shake. "No scarf's going to hide that, baby." She kept her gaze steady on him, even as her heart beat a little faster. She watched his reaction the way she'd watched fever thermometers when he was sick as a boy, waiting for the reading that would tell her how serious things really were. For a second, something like guilt flickered across his features, then vanished, buried under that thick layer of irritation he'd been wearing ever since she'd moved into the small apartment in his house 6 months ago, after the fall on the back steps that had scared them both more than either wanted to admit. "It's not about hiding," he snapped, too quickly, like someone who had practiced an argument in his head and found the lines suddenly useless. Just put it on, Ma, okay, please." The please arrived late, tacked on like an afterthought, but it was there, and May heard it. The wool brushed the back of his fingers as he held the scarf out, and she thought of all the times those same hands had reached for hers, sticky with ice cream, trembling after a nightmare, slick with sweat on graduation day when he'd hugged her so tightly she'd felt his ribs against her palms. She took the scarf because she knew when not to push, because 80 years had taught her that some battles were really just fear wearing its meanest coat. The fabric was softer than it looked, warm from his grip. She lifted it toward her neck, feeling the edges graze the fragile skin there, and looped it loosely around her shoulders. "There," she said. "Happy now." She thought she caught a flash of relief in his eyes, quick and unguarded, but it disappeared as soon as the kitchen door swung open, and his wife, Nia, stuck her head out. "Darius," Nia hissed, eyes wide, cheeks flushed from the oven's heat. "We're almost ready. Just keep her in there 1 more minute, okay?" She spotted the scarf and gave a small nod, as if confirming something on a hidden checklist. May's curiosity pricked up like a cat's ears. They were up to something. That was clear, but she couldn't tell if she was supposed to be pleased or worried. Nia flashed May a bright, nervous smile. "You doing okay, Mama May?" she asked, and there was genuine warmth in her voice, even if her eyes kept darting behind her at whatever chaos was unfolding around the kitchen island. "I'm fine, baby," May answered, adjusting the scarf so it didn't itch at her throat. "Just sitting here, getting older by the minute." Nia laughed, too quickly, and disappeared back into the kitchen, the door swinging shut behind her with a soft thud. Darius sank into the armchair across from May, elbows on his knees, hands clasped like he was holding onto something invisible and fragile. The ceiling fan hummed above them, pushing around the same patch of air, and one of the balloons broke free from the cluster, drifting slowly toward the doorway like it had someplace better to be. May watched her son's face, tracing the lines that hadn't been there 5 years ago. Tension lived in his shoulders now, in the way he kept flexing his fingers as if testing his grip on an invisible rope. "You know," she said, keeping her tone light, "if you wanted to buy me something nice, you could have gone with shoes. My feet still look 30. She wiggled her toes inside her sensible flats, earning a ghost of a smile from him. It wasn't much, but it was there, and she tucked it away carefully, the way she used to tuck his drawings into the front of the refrigerator. "It's not about you looking old," he muttered. It's the pictures." "Okay." He glanced toward the empty coffee table where May suspected a cake would soon appear, candles blazing like a tiny city on fire. "Every time Nia points her phone at you, you start fussing with your hair and asking her to shift the angle. You hate it? I hear you in your room later, complaining about your jawline." He said it with exasperation, but there was tenderness under it, a concern that peeked out around the edges. "I thought maybe if you had something you liked, you'd feel better about it." She hadn't realized he'd heard those muttered complaints, the ones she whispered to herself while rubbing cream into the soft folds along her neck, or smoothing the skin near her eyes where deep lines had settled like permanent parentheses. His words rearranged themselves in her mind, shifting from insult into something clumsy and protective. "Cover up your old face." Yes, but maybe what he'd meant was, "Let me help you feel less exposed to your own judgment." It didn't erase the sting, but it softened the edges. "You could have just said that," May replied, meeting his eyes. Instead of talking like some fool on the internet trying to be funny, she lifted one brow, the way she used to when he'd tried to lie about homework. The corner of his mouth twitched upward in a reluctant grin. "I don't like seeing you hurt," he admitted. "Not from a fall, not from a camera. I don't always say things right." It was the closest thing to an apology she'd gotten from him in months, and May felt something inside her chest loosen, like a knot gently unraveling. From the kitchen came the sound of a chair scraping and Nia's voice shushing someone, followed by the high, excited giggle of May's granddaughter, Layla. The lights in the living room dimmed suddenly, plunging the corners into soft shadow. Darius straightened, his nerves returning in an instant. "Okay," he said, standing up, "just keep the scarf on." "All right, it's part of it." Part of what May wanted to ask, but the words were swallowed by the sudden silence that fell over the house. The murmur of the fridge, the ticking clock above the mantel. Even the fans seemed to fade into the background as the kitchen door creaked open. May's eyes adjusted to the dim, catching the gleam of something bright and flickering in the doorway. The smell of candle smoke mingled with vanilla frosting, richer and more comforting than any perfume. Layla appeared first, walking slowly, her small face glowing in the orange light. Her hands were steady on the edge of the big white cake board, and her smile was so wide it looked like it might split her cheeks. Behind her came Nia, one hand hovering protectively near the tray, the other holding up her phone, already recording. The cake itself was crowned with what looked like a small constellation. Candles of different heights burning at once, sending up thin trails of silver-edged smoke that curled toward the ceiling. Everyone burst into song at once, voices overlapping and stumbling over the familiar melody. Darius took his place beside May, his shoulder brushing hers, his voice the loudest and most off-key of them all. As they sang, May's eyes stayed on the flames, each tiny light reflected in the polished surface of the dining room mirror behind them, multiplying until it looked like the whole wall had caught fire with little stars. She felt the scarf warm around her neck, the wool holding the heat of her skin, and wondered again what exactly they had planned. The song didn't sound like a simple birthday tune today. It carried something else in it, a kind of shaky hope. When they reached the last line, Layla stopped right in front of May and lifted her eyes. "Make a wish, Grandma," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. The cake was close enough now for May to read the careful, looping letters written in blue frosting across the top. For a heartbeat her breath caught, there, in neat, slightly uneven script, were the words that made the scarf around her neck suddenly make sense. That rearranged the whole afternoon into a new shape she hadn't expected at all. The room seemed to tilt, filled with the soft roar of candle flames and the held breath of the people she loved most. May leaned closer to the cake, the candlelight trembling in tiny bright pulses that made the frosting shimmer like wet paint under morning sun, and she felt the air shift around her as though everyone in the room had stepped into the same held breath. The blue letters, though slightly uneven, were written with such careful intention that she could almost feel the love pressed into every curve, every slow sweep of icing. She read them again, letting their warmth settle into her bones, the way sunlight settles on an old porch in spring. Her fingers tightened faintly on the edge of the sofa. Not from weakness but from the sudden swell of emotion rising like a tide she had not prepared for. Soft and unstoppable, she felt Darius watching her, his body radiating a nervous energy she could nearly taste in the air, a vibration against the quiet hush of candle flames. The scarf warmed against her neck, holding the echo of his earlier tension, but also something gentler underneath. Something he didn't yet know how to say aloud. Layla's small hands rested carefully beneath the tray, steady in a way that made May's heart lift with quiet pride, and the girl's eyes sparkled with expectation as though she already knew the wish her grandmother might make. The room around them glowed in amber hues, shadows stretching up the walls like painted silhouettes, softening every edge until even the worn armchair in the corner looked like a beloved artifact, instead of a tired piece of furniture. Somewhere near the kitchen doorway, Nia wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, still holding the phone steady, the recording light blinking as it captured every shifting emotion on May's face. The air smelled of warm vanilla and melted wax, layered with the familiar scent of home that always clung to moments worth remembering. May felt her throat tighten with a tenderness that surprised her. She had expected this day to feel heavy, but instead, something bright was rooting itself in her chest. Darius shifted slightly, the floorboard under his shoe giving a small creak that anchored the moment in something real and grounding. And when May looked at him, she saw no irritation there, now only a scared kind of hopefulness, trying to disguise itself as calm. He wasn't watching the cake. He was watching her, searching her face for clues, bracing for disappointment he feared he might have caused. The candles flickered again, their small flames bending in agreement as though urging him to breathe. May realized then that the scarf wasn't meant to hide anything. Not her face, not her age, not even her insecurities. It was an awkward gesture from a grown man who still didn't always know how to love out loud. A man who frowned his affection and masked his fear with rough edges. The understanding softened something so deep inside her that it surprised her with its warmth. She had spent months feeling like a burden, like a fragile box he didn't want to carry. But in that trembling moment, she saw the truth quietly unfolding in his eyes. He had been trying, clumsily, to keep her from hurting. The candle's glow danced across the frosting, casting reflections onto May's eyes that made them shine brighter than the room's dim light could explain, and she felt the presence of her family gather around her like an invisible embrace. Layla lifted her chin slightly, anticipation quivering through her tiny shoulders as though she were holding a secret she couldn't wait to see revealed. Behind her, Nia stepped closer, the phone lowering a fraction, her expression softening from excitement into something more nurturing. May took a slow breath, letting the warmth settle into every corner of her lungs, and felt her heartbeat steady beneath the calm. Like the gentle rhythm of waves brushing shore, she was surrounded by love imperfect, messy, awkwardly expressed. But love all the same, and it wrapped around her more tightly than any scarf ever could. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the glowing quiet sink into her, gathering her wish like a fragile thread. May opened her eyes again, the candlelight reflecting in their soft shine, and for a heartbeat, the room seemed to pulse with a quiet that wasn't silence but something fuller, like the world itself was listening for her next breath. Layla leaned forward just a little, her braids swaying as she adjusted her grip on the tray, determined not to let a single flicker of wax spill. The girl's excitement radiated outward, bright enough to make the corners of the dim room feel alive, as though even the furniture were leaning in to witness the moment. May's fingers brushed the air above the candles, feeling their warmth kiss her skin, and she let the weight of all the years behind her rest gently, instead of heavily. She wasn't mourning time today, not when the faces in front of her held so much hope. She inhaled slowly, drawing in the scent of frosting and melted wax, and something deeper, something like memory tugging at the edges of the moment. Darius shifted again, but this time there was no tension in the movement, only a restless kind of tenderness he didn't know where to put, like a man holding a fragile object he feared dropping. His hands hovered near May without actually touching her, as though he wanted to steady her but couldn't decide if she needed steadying. When she glanced at him, his expression flickered guilt, worry, love, all crowding behind his eyes, each emotion pushing forward for space. The candles reflected softly against his face, making him look younger for a fleeting instant, like the boy who used to run into her arms with scraped knees and fierce hugs that nearly knocked the wind from her. May felt that echo inside her chest, warm and familiar. A reminder that despite the edges adulthood had carved into him, the core of him was still that boy who loved hard and clumsy. She lifted her chin slightly, not in defiance but in quiet gratitude, letting him see that she understood more than he realized. Nia stepped closer, lowering the phone just enough that her expression became fully visible, her eyes shining with a tenderness that seemed to bridge the space between all three generations in the room. She wasn't just recording, she was witnessing, holding the moment steady with her presence the way she often did in the household's small storms. The scarf around May's neck caught a sliver of candlelight, its soft rose and cream threads glowing like something newly woven, as though the gesture behind it were still weaving itself into meaning. Nia's smile was gentle, unhurried, carrying a kind of reassurance that made May's chest grow warm. It struck her then that she wasn't just celebrating a birthday, she was being folded back into the fabric of her family, into a place where she wasn't simply tolerated but wanted, held, cherished in her imperfect aging form. The realization settled over her like a gentle quilt, stitched from dozens of small kindnesses she hadn't always noticed. Layla finally lifted her gaze to meet May's, her eyes wide and shimmering with reflected flame, and in that innocent, earnest expression May felt a power she hadn't felt in a long time, the power of being looked at with unfiltered love. The little girl's voice, when it came, was soft but steady, shaped by the sincerity that lived in her small hands and hopeful heart. "You have to blow them out before they melt everywhere," she whispered, as though sharing a precious secret. The faint tremor of excitement ran through her words, a tremor that made May want to laugh and cry at once. The candles crackled faintly, tiny sparks of wax jumping as the flames leaned and straightened again. May felt the warmth rise to her face, not from embarrassment but from a swelling sense of place, of belonging, of being seen not as old but as someone worth celebrating. She leaned a little closer, her breath gathering like a quiet prayer she hadn't yet spoken. May let her breath hover just above her lips, the warmth of it mingling with the heat rising from the candles as she considered, not just the wish itself but the meaning of wishing at all, something she hadn't done with intention in years. The soft glow illuminated the faint lines on her cheeks, each one a testament to laughter, grief, storms weathered, and the quiet triumphs no one ever applauded but mattered all the same. She realized suddenly that she didn't long for youth the way people assumed. She longed for connection, for the feeling of being a necessary part of the lives around her, rather than an accessory tucked into a corner. And here they were, her son, her daughter-in-law, her granddaughter, watching her with a reverence she hadn't expected, holding a cake that wasn't just a celebration but a message written in sugar and flame. The room seemed to hum with the sincerity of it, making her heart swell with tender ache. She lifted her chin a little, ready to claim joy instead of shrinking from the moment. Darius's breath caught when May leaned forward, as though he feared she might lose her balance or falter, and the tiny gasp he made revealed more love than any eloquent speech could. He half-extended his hand, then stopped himself, letting her choose her own steadiness. The candles cast soft gold across his face, highlighting the weariness etched around his eyes. Weariness born not just of work and responsibility but of worry for her. She could finally see it clearly now. The tension he carried wasn't resentment but fear. The fear of watching time steal pieces of someone he didn't know how to live without. May felt her heart tighten with compassion for him. For all the clumsy ways adults try to protect the people they love without knowing how to soften their language, something inside her shifted, opening with unexpected tenderness, and she realized she wasn't the only one aging. Her son was too, and he was learning to love differently, imperfectly, but earnestly. She breathed in slowly, letting that understanding settle deep within her. Nia adjusted her stance, phone steady but no longer the priority, her other hand gently pressing against Layla's back in a gesture of reassurance. Her posture carried its own quiet massage, a reminder that she had been holding the family together in unseen ways, guiding the emotional currents with a grace that made May feel safe. The candle's warm light brushed across Nia's face, accentuating the softness in her gaze, and May suddenly recognized the subtle orchestration behind the day. The scarf to soften her worries about photographs, the dimmed lights to flatter her aging skin, the carefully chosen frosting color that echoed her favorite blouse. These weren't the choices of people annoyed by her presence, but of people wanting her to feel beautiful, wanted, celebrated. The realization sent a wave of emotion through her, lifting her shoulders with the weight of gratitude she hadn't expected to carry today. She touched the scarf lightly, feeling its warmth deepen with purpose. Layla's expression turned earnest in that singular way only children manage, her eyes wide with the kind of belief that made moments feel magical instead of ordinary. "Don't forget your wish," she whispered, almost afraid that saying it too loudly might break the spell. Her excitement wrapped around May like a ribbon, tying her into the moment with joyful insistence. The candles flickered, bending slightly toward May as though urging her forward, and she felt the heat brush her cheeks like a blessing. She lowered her face just a little, letting her breath warm the tips of the flames, and she thought of everything she might desire: health, peace, more time, less fear, gentler days. But beneath all of that, one wish rose above the rest, simple, steady, and bright. She wished not to be hidden or softened or made smaller, but to be loved exactly as she was, with all the years and lines and stories that came with her. She let that wish settle fully in her heart before she finally drew breath to give it shape. May exhaled gently, sending a soft stream of air across the trembling flames, and for a suspended moment the room seemed to hold its breath with her as the lights wavered, bent, and then folded into darkness. A tiny trail of smoke rose from each wick, curling upward like silver ribbons that danced in the dim air, carrying her wish into the quiet places beyond sight. As soon as the last flame vanished, the room erupted into warm cheer, soft claps from Naya, an excited squeal from Layla, and a shaky laugh from Darius that sounded like relief wrapped in joy. May felt something loosened inside her, a quiet untying of old knots she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. The darkness left behind by the extinguished candles didn't feel like loss. It felt like space, room for something gentler to grow. The warmth on her cheeks lingered, not from the candles but from the affection radiating toward her, as though every person in the room had silently agreed to wrap her in light even when the flames were gone. The overhead lights brightened slowly as Nia flipped the dimmer, revealing the cake in its full decorated glorious whirls of frosting, soft colors, tiny edible pearls, catching the glow like scattered morning dew. May blinked as her eyes adjusted, and she caught her reflection faintly in the glass of the framed photograph on the wall behind Darius. For the first time in years, she didn't flinch at the sight. The scarf around her neck, the gentle lighting, the way her family looked at her, all of it softened the edges she usually criticized, replacing harsh judgment with a surprising sense of acceptance. She lifted a hand to touch her cheek, almost expecting it to feel different under her fingertips, but the change wasn't in her skin. It was in the way she allowed herself to be seen. She smiled without thinking, and the expression fit her face so naturally that she wondered how long it had been since she'd worn it without self-consciousness. Darius let out a breath that sounded like he'd been holding it for hours, maybe even days, and he lowered himself onto the arm of her chair as though afraid to break the fragile tenderness of the moment. His shoulder brushed hers, warm and tentative, and when she looked up at him, his eyes were softer than she'd seen in a long while. "You did it," he murmured, the words simple but heavy with unspoken meaning: gratitude, admiration, relief. His voice trembled just slightly, betraying the emotional weight he'd tried to disguise beneath gruffness. May reached up and touched his hand lightly, a gesture without ceremony but full of reassurance. His fingers curled instinctively around hers, and for a heartbeat the years between them collapsed into something small and almost sweet. She realized then how much he needed this moment, too, not just for her sake but for his own. A reminder that time hadn't taken her from him. Not yet. Naya carefully placed the phone on the coffee table, no longer interested in filming now that the heart of the moment had passed, and she moved around the room, collecting plates with a quiet, practiced grace. "All right," she said, her voice bright yet gentle, the tone of someone choosing joy on purpose. "Who wants the first slice? I made sure the frosting isn't too sweet." "Mama May, I remembered you said it gives you headaches now." She winked as she set a plate in front of May, the gesture warm and personal, a small kindness that nestled itself into the growing pile of gratitude swelling in May's chest. The cake looked almost too pretty to cut, but the thought of tasting something made just for her stirred a spark of happiness. She nodded at Nia, feeling the warmth of being cared for in ways that mattered quietly, deeply, without fanfare. Layla hopped closer, practically vibrating with excitement as she leaned against May's knee, her small form radiating joy like a lantern. "Grandma," she whispered loudly, much too loudly to be considered a whisper, "did you make a really good wish? Because I made one too, but I can't tell you or it won't come true." Her eyes sparkled with that magical certainty only children possess. The kind that made the world feel bigger and kinder than it often was. May laughed softly, the sound bubbling up from a place inside her that had been quiet for too long. I think we both made good ones, baby, she said, smoothing a hand over Layla's hair. The child leaned into the touch with a content sigh, and May felt the gentle weight of her presence like a blessing. Around them, the house filled again with motion and sound, but the moment remained soft and whole. May accepted the first slice of cake from Naya, the fork sinking lightly into the soft layers as she lifted a bite to her lips, tasting the delicate sweetness that seemed to echo all the gentle intentions hovering around her. The flavor was mellow, perfectly balanced, nothing overwhelming, just like the care behind it. She closed her eyes as she savored it, letting the simple pleasure bloom across her senses, and when she opened them again, her family was watching her with a mixture of hope and affection that warmed the room more than any candle could. This is perfect, she said, her voice soft but certain, and the way Nia's shoulders relaxed told May that the younger woman had been waiting for that approval more than she'd admit. Darius let out a small laugh, low and relieved, while Layla clapped her hands, delighted simply because May was delighted. The moment wove them all together with invisible thread, fragile yet strong. Like all the best bonds, the scarf around May's neck shifted slightly as she moved, its soft wool brushing against her skin, like a whispered reminder of how the day had begun, and how different it felt now. She touched the edge of it thoughtfully, remembering the sting of Darius's earlier words, but the memory no longer felt sharp. It felt reshaped, softened by the truth behind it and by everything that had unfolded since. She realized then that aging had not taken her dignity, or beauty, or strength. It had only changed the way she needed to see herself. The lines on her face were not something to hide, they were proof that she had lived, loved, endured, and kept going even when life asked more of her than she thought she could give. And somehow, in the glow of her family's affection, she felt more seen than she had in years. The scarf became less of a shield and more of a symbol of love, offered imperfectly but earnestly. Darius leaned back in the chair, rubbing the bridge of his nose as though embarrassed by how emotional he felt. And May saw the flicker of vulnerability in him that he rarely allowed to surface. He had grown into a man who carried the world on his shoulders, quietly and sometimes resentfully. But beneath all that weight lived the same tender-hearted boy who used to cry when she left the room for too long. "Ma," he began awkwardly, the word catching in his throat. I wanted you to feel good today." He paused, searching for the right words, but words had never been his strongest tool. His voice softened. "You deserve that." The simplicity of it hit her harder than any elaborate speech could have. She reached out and squeezed his hand gently. Not to comfort him but to acknowledge him, to let him know. She saw the effort behind his imperfections and loved him for all of it. His fingers tightened around hers. Grateful, Naya handed Layla a small plate of cake. And the child immediately perched on the edge of May's chair, swinging her feet with uncontainable joy as she ate. "Grandma," Layla said, between eager bites, "you looked so pretty when you blew out the candles. Daddy said the scarf would make you sparkle." She leaned closer and whispered, as though sharing a holy secret, "It worked." May laughed, the sound warm and full, stirring the air like a soft bell. Her granddaughter's innocence, her belief that beauty could be made with candles and scarves and love, filled May with a kind of wonder she hadn't felt since motherhood had first taught her how deep affection could run. She pressed a kiss to the girl's forehead, breathing in the faint scent of shampoo and sugar, and felt the moment imprint itself on her heart like a photograph she'd remember long after. Birthdays blurred together. Nia returned to the table with more plates, humming a tune that mixed effortlessly with the soft murmur of family voices and the quiet ticking of the living room clock. The air was warmer now, softened by laughter and the settling glow of the celebration. May watched them all move around her, her son's awkward tenderness, Nia's quiet orchestration of joy, Layla's radiant innocence, and she felt the fullness of the wish she had made. Not for youth, not for beauty, not even for more years, though she hoped for that too. She had wished for belonging, for connection, for a reminder that she still mattered deeply to the people she loved. And here it was, unfolding in real time, wrapped not in perfection but in sincerity. She breathed in gently, letting the moment settle through her like light filtering through curtains in the early morning as the last crumbs of cake disappeared. And the laughter softened into comfortable quiet. May leaned back against the sofa, the scarf warm and familiar around her neck. The day had started with a sting, a careless phrase wrapped in worry, but it had grown into something she hadn't expected, something healing, something bright, something that felt like the opening of a door she hadn't knocked on in years. she glanced at the cake again. The extinguished candles still releasing whispered trails of smoke, each wisp curling like a promise. Her family gathered close, filling the room with their presence, and May felt her heart expand with gratitude, so deep it made her eyes sting. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel old. She felt loved. The quiet after the celebration settled over the room like a soft blanket, warm and steady, carrying with it the faint sweetness of frosting, and the comforting hum of family voices drifting into softer tones as the excitement eased. May rested her hand on the arm of the sofa, feeling the familiar texture beneath her palm, grounding her as her thoughts drifted between the warmth of the present and the unexpected flood of emotion the day had stirred. The melted candle wax had begun to harden on the cake, forming tiny frozen rivers down the sides of the wicks, their faint trails curling faintly upward. Layla still sat close, humming to herself as she licked a bit of frosting from her fingertip, her small body radiating the kind of unconcerned joy only childhood could hold. May watched her for a moment, letting the simplicity of that happiness seep into her own chest, soothing places inside her that had ached quietly for too long. Darius rose from his chair, stretching his back with a soft groan that betrayed how tightly he held tension in his muscles. He paced a few slow steps as though trying to shake off some internal weight, his hands slipping into his pockets before emerging again, restless and uncertain. May's eyes followed him, sensing the shift in his energy. The celebration had relaxed him, but something deeper still tugged at him from beneath the surface. His earlier words hovered in her mind. Not the careless sting of cover up your old face, but the vulnerable confession that he didn't like seeing her hurt. She recognized the shape of that emotion. It was the quiet fear children carried into adulthood, the fear of losing the one person who had always been their anchor. May felt a tenderness rise in her chest, threaded with equal parts love and understanding, as she watched him linger near the doorway like he wasn't ready to leave the moment behind just yet. Nia moved gracefully between the kitchen and living room, collecting plates and gathering used napkins while offering small smiles that revealed how deeply she had invested herself in making the day special. Her hum returned, soft and melodic, filling the room with a warmth that reminded May of Sunday mornings long ago when music filled her mother's kitchen. The domestic rhythm soothed her, gently pulling her back from the edge of heavier reflections. The scarf warmed further against her neck, its presence now less a reminder of insecurity and more a symbol of how her family had tried awkwardly, imperfectly, but sincerely to make her feel cherished. She touched the fabric lightly, her fingers brushing its soft wool as though acknowledging both the hurt and the healing entwined within it. The room felt safe, bathed in the glow of shared love and quiet after-effects of celebration. Layla shifted suddenly, climbing into May's lap with the fearless confidence only children possessed, her small arms wrapping gently around May's waist. "Grandma," she murmured, "can we save the pretty candles? The ones that sparkled?" Her voice carried the hopeful lilt of someone who believed memories could be kept like treasures in a box, preserved exactly as they were. May let out a soft laugh, running her fingers through the child's hair, marveling at the silky smoothness of each strand. "We can save them," she answered, "though they'll look a little different tomorrow. Things change when they rest." Layla nodded solemnly, as though accepting a rule of the universe, her forehead pressing lightly against May's chest. The weight of her granddaughter settled deeper into May's heart, anchoring her firmly in the present moment. She felt calmer, steadier, like each breath she took was stitching her more securely into the fabric of her family's life. May smoothed Layla's hair as the child relaxed against her, the weight of her tiny frame a comforting reminder that some parts of life still moved gently, untouched by the rush of passing years. The steady rise and fall of Layla's breathing pressed softly against her ribs, grounding her even as old memories stirred beneath the surface, like leaves shifting in a quiet pond. She thought of birthdays, long pancakes baked in small kitchens, candles flickering beside eager faces, laughter spilling into evenings that felt endless. Those moments had once defined her sense of purpose, filling her days with meaning she never questioned. Now, watching her son and granddaughter move around her living room, she understood with renewed clarity that purpose didn't end when roles changed. It simply reshaped itself. The realization settled warmly against her heart, easing the loneliness she sometimes felt in the quiet hours of dawn. Darius paused midway, through straightening a stack of plates, his shoulders rising and falling with a deep breath as though he were gathering the courage to speak. His gaze drifted to May, lingering with an expression she recognized from years of motherhood, the look of someone wrestling with words he didn't know how to shape. He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture he'd carried since childhood, when guilt tugged at him too tightly. May met his eyes, offering a small smile that invited honesty without demanding it. Something inside him seemed to loosen at the sight. He crossed the room slowly, his footsteps quiet on the carpet, and sat on the edge of the coffee table facing her. "Ma," he began softly, "can I ask you something?" His voice held an uncertainty she wasn't used to hearing from him, a tremor that revealed more vulnerability than he probably intended. May nodded, her hand still resting gently on Layla's shoulder. "It felt like you'd been slipping away a little," he said, his words halting but sincere, as though each one needed permission before leaving his mouth. "Not physically, not just that, but like you've been shrinking from things you used to enjoy. Pictures, conversations, even going outside sometimes." He looked down at his hands, turning them palm up, as though expecting to find answers written in the lines of his skin. "I didn't know how to pull you back without saying the wrong thing. And then today, I guess it all came out messy." He exhaled slowly, the breath carrying months of worry he had never voiced. May felt something inside her shift, not painfully, but tenderly. Like the gentle stretch of old fabric finding its shape again. She had not realized how much of her hesitation, her self-consciousness, had been visible to him. She had thought she was hiding it well, but mothers forget. Children grow up learning to read the silences between their words. Nia stepped into the room just then, pausing when she sensed the heaviness in the air. Instead of interrupting, she set the remaining plates quietly on the table and folded her hands, waiting with the patience of someone who understood that certain conversations needed room to breathe. Her presence was steady, a silent pillar of support that gave Darius space to continue. May watched the subtle exchange between them, the way Nia's eyes softened when they met his, the way he leaned slightly toward her without realizing it. She felt a swell of gratitude for the woman her son had chosen, someone who seemed to understand the language of his heart even when he couldn't speak it clearly. Nia offered May a small, encouraging smile, as though reminding her she was not alone in facing the emotional weight of the moment. The warmth of that silent gesture wrapped around May like another layer of comfort. May shifted slightly, adjusting Layla's position so the child remained comfortable, then reached out and placed her free hand over Darius's. His skin was warm, his fingers tense beneath her touch, but the tension eased as he looked up, meeting her gaze fully. "Baby," she said softly, her voice carrying the same steadiness she'd used when he was small and overwhelmed by feelings he didn't yet understand. "I wasn't slipping away. I was just getting used to being seen differently. By myself, mostly." She let the words settle, watching as understanding flickered behind his eyes. "Growing older isn't about disappearing, but sometimes it feels that way when I forget how to be gentle with myself." Darius swallowed hard, his breath catching in the quiet between them. May squeezed his hand once firmly. "But today reminded me that I'm still here and I'm still needed. Even if I forget that sometimes, you remind me." Darius's eyes shimmered with a mixture of relief and remorse, the kind that made him look more like the boy she once guided through heartbreaks and scraped knees than the grown man standing before her now. He blinked once, as though steadying himself, and then let out a breath that carried months of unspoken fear with it. "I don't want to lose you," he admitted quietly, the words trembling at the edges. "Not to age, not to sadness, not to whatever makes you pull yourself back." His voice cracked on the last word, a small fracture that revealed how long he had been holding everything inside. May felt her heart tighten, not from sorrow but from the profound tenderness of realizing just how deeply he still needed her presence. Not as a caretaker or guide, but simply as his mother. She brushed her thumb over the back of his hand, a soothing gesture that had once calmed him at age 5 and now seemed to anchor him again at 40. Nia stepped closer, placing one gentle hand on Darius's shoulder, and the contact seemed to steady him further, grounding him in a way May recognized instantly. She watched the two of them, their bodies leaning subtly toward each other like plants growing toward shared sunlight. There was no grand drama in the moment, only a quiet demonstration of love, steady, unwavering, human. May admired the way Nia supported him without overshadowing him, the way her presence softened the edges of his worry. It reminded May that family was built not just on blood, but on the willingness to stand beside each other in both the celebrations and the fragile in-between moments. The melody of Nia's earlier humming lingered faintly in the room, as if the air itself held on to her reassurance. May felt gratitude swell in her chest, warm and full. Layla stirred slightly, lifting her head from May's lap as though sensing the emotional shift in the room. Her wide eyes moved between the adults, taking in the seriousness of their expressions. And she reached up to touch May's cheek gently. "Grandma, are you sad?" she asked, her voice small and pure, unburdened by the complexities that tangled adults into knots. May smiled, smoothing her fingers through the child's hair, and shook her head softly. "No, baby," she whispered. "I'm just feeling a lot of things at once." Layla considered this thoughtfully, then nodded with solemn understanding. Even if she didn't entirely grasp the meaning, she curled back into May's side, offering the comfort of her simple presence. A reminder that love didn't always need words to be felt deeply. May breathed in the scent of her granddaughter's hair, feeling something inside her settle into place. Darius straightened slightly, his shoulders squaring as though he were preparing himself to speak from a more honest place. "I didn't mean to make you feel like you needed to hide," he said, his voice softer now, stripped of frustration and filtered only through love. "The scarf. It was supposed to help, not hurt. I thought if you felt more comfortable, you'd stop dodging the camera. Stop worrying about the little things you think we notice but we don't. We just notice you." His words hung in the air, weaving themselves into the fragile quiet like threads of truth. May listened, absorbing each syllable, and felt the heaviness of misunderstanding unraveling between them. She had carried the memory of his earlier tone like a sharp stone in her pocket. But now it softened into something rounder, something shaped by intention rather than thoughtlessness. She nodded slowly, letting her understanding show in the gentle lift of her features. May shifted her posture, easing her arm around Layla while keeping her gaze fixed on her son. "I know you meant well," she said, her voice reaching into the emotional space between them with warmth. "And I'm learning to see myself differently too. Maybe I've been afraid of becoming invisible, even to myself." The admission surprised her even as she said it, but it felt true in a way she hadn't fully acknowledged before. Darius's expression softened further, the worry lines around his mouth relaxing as though her honesty gave him permission to release his own fears. Nia squeezed his shoulder gently, her touch speaking the reassurance he couldn't quite articulate. May looked between them, the man she raised and the woman who steadied him, and felt her heart swell with pride, with gratitude, with the tender ache of knowing love evolves but never fades. The soft ticking of the living room clock filled the silence that followed, its steady rhythm weaving gently through the air as if giving their emotions a place to settle. May felt the weight of Layla against her side, warm and familiar, grounding her while the moment stretched open between her and Darius like a delicate thread they were both learning to hold carefully. She looked at her son, really looked, and saw not just the man he had become but the boy he once was. The one who used to cling to her hand at the grocery store and whisper that he didn't want her to ever grow old. It struck her now that perhaps a part of him still held that fear, tucked into the quiet corners of his heart where adulthood rarely allowed him to look. The realization softened something deep within her, loosening the last remnants of the hurt she had carried from earlier. She inhaled slowly, letting compassion fill her lungs. Darius leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped tightly, as though he feared they might shake. "I know I should have said it differently," he murmured, his voice low, fragile around the edges. "I didn't mean it the way it sounded." He glanced toward the scarf, his expression twisting with regret. I've been scared. After your fall, after seeing you get tired faster, I don't know how to handle it. I guess I keep trying to fix things instead of listening." His fingers flexed restlessly, opening and closing in quiet frustration with himself. May watched him with a gentle steadiness, recognizing the shape of his struggle, the same stubborn love that once made him insist on carrying groceries he was too small to lift. His heart was the same, only the world around him had grown heavier. Nia shifted her stance beside him, sliding her hand down from his shoulder to lace her fingers quietly with his, the gesture subtle yet deeply anchoring. Her presence steadied him like a firm but tender hand on a ship's rudder. She didn't interrupt. She simply held space, offering him the kind of emotional balance he had always struggled to maintain alone. May felt a deep swell of gratitude for this quiet woman, who had woven herself so naturally into their family's emotional fabric. "He worries more than he admits," Nia said softly, her voice warm with affection. "About you, about us, about everything he can't control." She gave May a tiny smile, one filled with reassurance rather than apology. May returned it with equal warmth. Recognizing the truth of those words instantly, Layla shifted again, lifting her head sleepily as though pulled from the edges of drowsiness by the shift in tone. Her brows furrowed in innocent concern. "Daddy worries too much," she declared with the blunt honesty that only children possessed, her voice small but sure. "Grandma is strong." She punctuated the statement with a tiny nod before nestling back against May's side, satisfied that she had solved the problem. May couldn't help the soft chuckle that escaped her, brushing a hand over Layla's shoulder. The child's certainty was like sunlight breaking through clouds, simple, unfiltered, and full of belief. It warmed May from the inside out, reminding her that strength looked different now than it once had. But it was still hers. May took a slow breath, choosing her words with care. "Baby," she said to Darius, her voice rich with the kind of wisdom that only years could carve. "You don't need to fix me. I'm not broken. I'm just changing." She let the truth of it settle between them, watching as Darius absorbed the words. "And you don't have to carry the weight of time on your shoulders alone. I'm still here. Still me. Still your mother?" She reached out her free hand, offering it to him openly. Darius looked at it for a heartbeat before accepting, his larger hand wrapping around hers with a tenderness that carried both apology and love. His grip was warm, familiar, and for the first time all evening, steady. The tension in his shoulders seemed to melt as he held her hand, the rigid line of his posture softening into something more vulnerable, more honest. He blinked slowly, as though grounding himself in the reassurance her touch offered. "I just don't want to wake up one day and realize I missed time with you because I was too afraid to face things," he admitted, the words thick with emotion. May felt her throat tighten, but she held his gaze, letting him see her certainty. "Then don't miss it," she said quietly. "Be here with me. Not as my protector, not as my caretaker, just as my son." The simplicity of the request settled over him like a warm blanket, pulling the sharp edges from his worry. Behind them, the soft hum of the house filled the quiet, steady and comforting. Darius bowed his head for a moment, his thumb brushing over May's knuckles in a gentle rhythm that felt almost like an apology spoken through touch rather than words. When he finally lifted his gaze again, his eyes shone with a clarity that hadn't been there earlier, a quiet understanding, a soft surrender to the truth that loving someone meant walking beside them, not ahead of them or in their place. "I can do that," he whispered, and though the words were simple, they carried a promise deeper than any elaborate vow. May felt the sincerity settle into her chest like warmth rising from embers, steady and enduring. She offered him a small smile, one that softened the lines around her eyes and felt entirely her own. The room around them seemed to exhale, the emotional tension dissolving into something gentler, something whole. Naya stepped closer and rested her free hand lightly against May's shoulder, her touch soft, yet full of quiet strength. "We're all learning," she said, her voice steady as the hum of a lullaby, "how to take care of each other in new ways, how to let things change without letting go of what matters." Her fingers squeezed gently, grounding May with a tenderness that felt both familial and deeply personal. May turned her head slightly, taking in the warmth in Nia's expression, the reassurance, the compassion, the unspoken gratitude for the woman who had shaped the man she now loved. May felt her heart expand with affection, recognizing the shared journey they were all navigating together. Change did not erase connection, it simply reshaped it, making room for new forms of love to grow. Layla shifted again, sitting up fully now, her bright eyes searching each adult face in turn with innocent curiosity. "Are we done being sad now?" she asked, her voice light but expectant, as though she held the authority to declare the emotional weather of the room. May let out a soft laugh, brushing a thumb across the child's cheek. "We were never sad, sweetheart," she said. "We were just talking with our hearts." Layla considered this seriously, then nodded, apparently satisfied with the explanation. "Good," she said, "because the cake is not gone yet, and cake makes everything better." The earnestness in her tone struck a chord in May, filling her with a joy so warm it made her eyes sting. Children had a way of calling life back into the room with astonishing ease. May lifted Layla gently off her lap so she could stand, her body slower but still steady, still capable. Nia moved instinctively to support her, but May shook her head with a gentle smile, signaling that she could rise on her own. And she did slowly, carefully, but with a pride that straightened her posture and softened her breath. The scarf around her neck shifted with the movement, its soft wool brushing her collarbone, like a quiet reminder of the journey they had taken today, from misunderstanding to honesty, from hurt to healing. She touched the scarf lightly, not out of insecurity but out of gratitude. Recognizing now that it represented not concealment but care, she stepped toward the table where the cake sat, its once bright candles now gently curled with cooled wax, and felt a serene sense of belonging settle into her bones. Naya handed her another small slice, and May accepted it without hesitation, letting the normalcy of the gesture ease the last threads of tension lingering in the air. "This one's for later," Naya said with a wink, wrapping it in a small container. "Something sweet to end the night." May chuckled softly, touched by the thoughtfulness layered into even the simplest actions. She watched as her son and granddaughter laughed over something silly, a crooked candle. A frosting smudged the sight stirred a warmth that felt almost youthful in her chest. She realized then that age hadn't dimmed her capacity for joy. It had simply taught her to recognize it more clearly, to hold it with gentler hands. As the evening deepened, and the house settled into its soft nighttime hum, May looked at her family, at the people who misunderstood her sometimes, who worried too loudly or loved too awkwardly, but who tried with their whole hearts. She felt the fullness of her wish echoed through her quietly, to be seen, to be valued, to remain a thread in the fabric of their days rather than a fading memory. And as she watched them move around her, laughing and chatting and living within the warmth of shared space, she knew with certainty that the wish had already begun to come true. She was not slipping away. She was rooted here, grounded in their love, wrapped in moments like this one, moments that reminded her that she still mattered, that she was still deeply, fiercely loved. The evening air settled into a comforting stillness as the remnants of celebration faded into soft echoes, leaving the house bathed in a warm glow that felt almost sacred in its quiet. May stood near the dining table, her fingers grazing the smooth edge of the cake platter as she traced the faint swirls of frosting left behind. The scarf around her neck rested gently against her skin, no longer feeling like an attempt to hide but instead like a reminder of the love threaded through the day. The soft hum of the refrigerator blended with the distant laughter of her family, their voices drifting in from the hallway as they put away decorations and tidied up stray bits of ribbon and wrapping. May took a slow breath, letting the comfort of the moment settle through her like sunlight, warming old bones. It felt peaceful, familiar, and subtly transformed all at once. Darius reappeared in the doorway, his hands empty now, his expression softer than she had seen in months. He lingered there for a moment as though unsure whether to interrupt her quiet reflection. The tension that had woven itself around him earlier seemed almost entirely unwound, replaced by something steadier in intention, maybe, or a resolve taking root. He stepped forward with careful movements, as though not wanting to disturb the fragile tenderness of the night. "Ma," he said gently, his voice carrying a calm sincerity. "You ready to sit for a bit? Nia's making tea." He gestured vaguely toward the kitchen, where the faint clink of cups and the soft rush of running water signaled Nia's familiar, comforting rhythm. May turned to him, her heart warming at the sweetness in his tone, a warmth that rose like steam from a freshly poured cup. Layla, bouncing in behind him with a burst of energy that seemed immune to the slow winding down of the evening, tugged at May's sleeve. "Grandma, can you come see the drawing I made for you?" she asked, holding up a folded piece of paper that had clearly been decorated with intense, joyful concentration. Bright streaks of crayon peeked through the folds, promising a masterpiece only a child could create. May smiled and placed a gentle hand on the girl's arm. "I'd love to, baby," she said, allowing herself to be led toward the sofa. The softness of the cushions welcomed her as she eased into the seat, Layla climbing up beside her with all the grace of a small whirlwind. The child unfurled the paper with great ceremony, revealing a vibrant drawing of May surrounded by what appeared to be large, uneven stars. Darius settled on the opposite couch cushion, leaning forward slightly as though wanting to be part of the moment without overpowering it. "Looks like you made her sparkle," he said to Layla, his tone light and affectionate. Layla nodded with immense pride. "Because Grandma sparkles when she's happy," she explained matter-of-factly. May felt her throat tighten with emotion. Children had a way of distilling truth into the simplest, purest forms. She traced the stars on the page, their uneven lines perfect in their sincerity. "I love it," she whispered, brushing the child's hair aside to kiss her temple. The warmth of the gesture settled around them like a gentle blanket, weaving another layer of connection into the evening. May let the drawing rest on her lap, smoothing its edges with careful fingers as though it were something fragile and precious. The colors shimmered under the soft lamplight's yellows, blues, and gentle strokes of pink that made her smile widen with each passing second. Layla leaned against her side, warm and content, humming a tiny tune that carried the sweetness of childhood innocence. Across from them, Darius watched quietly, his elbows resting on his knees, his expression softened by something thoughtful, almost reverent. It struck May that moments like these didn't announce themselves with grand gestures. They unfolded gently, piece by piece, revealing their meaning only when she paused long enough to notice. She breathed in deeply, letting gratitude settle into the spaces once occupied by worry. Naya walked in carrying a tray with 3 steaming cups of tea, the fragrant aroma of chamomile filling the room like a calming tide. She set the tray on the coffee table and handed May a cup with both hands, a gesture that felt ceremonial in its gentleness. "Careful, it's hot," Nia murmured, offering a warm smile that softened the already cozy atmosphere. May accepted the cup, feeling the heat seep into her palms, grounding her in the present moment. Nia sat down beside Darius, her knee brushing against his, their quiet closeness speaking volumes about their partnership. "I found your favorite honey," she added softly, nodding toward the small dish on the tray. May chuckled, touched by the thoughtful gesture. It amazed her how Nia always seemed to know the small things that made her feel cared for. Layla perked up at the mention of honey, scooting closer to examine the tiny golden jar with an enthusiasm that bordered on reverence. "Can I have some too?" she asked, her eyes wide with hopeful anticipation. Nia laughed softly. "Just a little," she said, dipping the spoon lightly before stirring a drop into the girl's cup of warm milk. The soft clink of the spoon echoed gently in the quiet room, adding a musical touch to the evening's serenity. Layla took a sip and sighed dramatically, leaning back into May's side. "This is the best night ever," she declared, her voice full of conviction. May felt her heart swell at the simplicity and sincerity of the statement, a warmth spreading through her chest that felt more soothing than the tea in her hands. Darius leaned back into the couch cushions, his body finally starting to relax in a way May had not seen in months. "I've been thinking," he began, the words tentative but steady, "about what you said earlier about being here with you, not trying to fix everything." He paused, glancing at Nia as though seeking silent encouragement. She gave him a small nod, her eyes shining with quiet pride. "I'm not good with stuff like that," he continued, rubbing his palms together, "but I want to try. I want us to do more things together, not because you need help, just because I miss spending time with you." The confession lingered in the air, warm and fragile, like the last glowing ember in a fire. May felt her throat tighten with emotion, the softness of his words settling deep into her heart. May reached across the small space between them, her hand hovering until Darius met it halfway. Their fingers intertwined gently, the contact familiar yet renewed with fresh intention. "I'd like that," she said, her voice steady despite the fullness of emotion rising within her. "We don't need big plans, just little moments like this." She gestured softly to the cozy scene, the tea, the drawing, the hum of quiet comfort. Darius nodded, relief flickering across his features as though the simplicity of her request lifted a weight from his shoulders. Layla watched them curiously, sensing the meaning of the moment, even if she couldn't fully understand its depth. She slid her small hand over May's wrist, completing the circle of connection with innocent ease. The hum of the house seemed to shift subtly, as though responding to the warmth flooding the room. May sipped her tea, savoring the soothing flavor while letting the quiet stretch comfortably between them. It wasn't an empty silence but a full one rich with understanding, with healing, with the promise of closeness returning after being strained by unspoken fears. The scarf, resting softly against her skin, seemed to glow faintly in the lamplight, its presence a small symbol of transformation. May let her gaze travel across her family, the people she had loved fiercely, imperfectly, unwaveringly, and felt something inside her heart settle into a peaceful certainty. She wasn't fading, she was returning. May let her fingers drift across the soft wool of the scarf as she rested back against the sofa. The gesture, small but comforting, grounding her in the gentle flow of the moment. The lamplight cast a warm halo across the room, softening the edges of the furniture and giving everything a tender glow that made the space feel more intimate. Layla leaned against her with the easy trust of a child who belonged entirely in the moment, her small hand absent-mindedly tracing shapes on May's sleeve. The rhythmic motion soothed her, weaving together memory and presence in a way that felt almost sacred. May took a slow sip of her tea, the warmth spreading through her like a quiet reminder that healing didn't always come from grand gestures. Sometimes it bloomed in small, steady breaths shared with people who loved her. Nia shifted slightly on the opposite couch, tucking one leg beneath her as she rested her arm along the back of the cushion. "You know," she began softly, her voice carrying the delicate ease of someone offering a gift rather than advice. "We were actually planning something bigger for tonight, a whole slideshow of photos from over the years." She laughed gently, shaking her head, "But I didn't want you to feel uncomfortable, so we decided to keep it simple." May blinked in surprise, imagining her life displayed in images, childhood snapshots, young motherhood frozen in bright colors, moments that had shaped her, weathered her, strengthened her. The idea tugged at her heart in unexpected ways, stirring a warmth both nostalgic and bittersweet. "I would have liked that," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "Not because I look the same as I used to, but because those memories matter." Darius looked up sharply, surprise flickering across his features. "Really?" he asked, uncertainty threading through the single word. I thought it would make you sad." May smiled gently, setting her tea down on the table so she could fold her hands together in her lap. Memories don't make me sad, she replied. Forgetting them does, and avoiding them does. Her gaze drifted to the drawing Layla had made, the stars shining around her sketched face. I've spent so much time worrying that my age was the only thing people saw, but tonight reminded me that what you all see is so much bigger. The admission loosened something inside her, a knot she hadn't realized had stayed tightly tied for years. She felt lighter, open in a way she hadn't dared to be in a long time. Layla tilted her head, processing May's words with childlike seriousness. Grandma, she said thoughtfully, when you're old, it just means you're magic with extra sparkles. She tapped the scarf as if it were proof. May laughed, the sound warm and unguarded, reaching out to cup Layla's cheek. Is that so? She asked. Layla nodded vigorously, her braids bouncing with enthusiasm. Yep, Daddy said wrinkles mean your heart made a lot of smiles. She beamed proudly, unaware of how deeply her words pierced the air with sweetness. May glanced toward Darius, who looked both embarrassed and touched, his expression softening into a sheepish grin. I might have said something like that, he admitted, scratching the back of his neck. She overhears everything. The moment filled the room with gentle laughter, the kind that settled easily into the corners like a warm blanket. May felt the laughter ease something deep within her, smoothing away remnants of earlier tension. She leaned back slightly, allowing the comfort of her family's presence to wrap around her like a familiar melody. The night felt fuller somehow. Not because of the celebration itself, but because of the clarity it brought, clarity about her place in this home, in their lives, in the unfolding story of who they were becoming together. She looked around the room, taking in the small details, the soft flicker of the lamp, the calming scent of chamomile, the way Darius's hand rested protectively near the way Layla's small fingers played with the edge of the drawing. It all felt like a quiet testament to how deeply she was woven into their world, not as a burden but as a beloved thread. The clock on the wall ticked softly, marking the passage of time in gentle increments rather than harsh reminders. May let her gaze linger on it for a moment, reflecting on how time had become both a challenge and a companion. Tonight, though, it felt less like an enemy and more like a witness, one that honored the years she had lived and the presence she still offered. She exhaled slowly, letting gratitude spill through her like warm honey. Maybe someday, she said with a wistful smile, we can look at that slideshow together, not to compare, just to remember. Nia's face brightened, her eyes shining with excitement at the possibility. I'd love that, she replied. We can make it whenever you like. May nodded, feeling the gentle promise settle comfortably in her heart. Asterisk. May let her smile linger as the thought of revisiting old memories warmed her from within, the idea carrying a sweetness that surprised her with its clarity. Layla shifted closer, curling against her side with the soft trust of a child who believed love was as steady as the sunrise. May wrapped an arm around her, savoring the gentle weight, the innocence, the reminder that life continued to offer moments of tenderness no matter how many years had passed. The scarf brushed lightly against her collarbone as she moved, its soft texture grounding her again in the present. She touched the fabric with faint amusement. Tit had started the day as an unexpected sting, but now it felt almost symbolic, a thread connecting misunderstanding to healing. The house felt warmer now, its hum steady and familiar, wrapping them all in a sense of togetherness she hadn't realized she'd been craving so deeply. Darius drummed his fingers thoughtfully on his knee before clearing his throat. The sound soft but deliberate. You know, he began, eyes flicking toward May with a mixture of caution and sincerity. I've been thinking a lot about the extra apartment. The one by the garden. He paused, searching her face for any sign of discomfort. We were wondering if you'd want to make it yours, not because you need more supervision or anything like that, he added quickly, but because it's sunnier, bigger, and closer to everything happening in the house. He rubbed the back of his neck, his nerves evident even through his gentle tone. Only if you'd want it, no pressure. May blinked, taken aback by the unexpected offer. The apartment near the garden had always been her favorite space, sunlit, warm, with windows that overlooked the roses she used to tend. Nia leaned forward slightly, her expression open and encouraging. We thought it might feel more like a home inside a home, she added. Someplace that's yours, with room for your things and your quiet, when you want it. Her voice carried the steady warmth May had come to appreciate, the kind of sincerity that made every offer feel more like a gift than an obligation. You've spent so much of your life taking care of others, May. Nia continued softly. We want to make sure you have a space that cares for you too. The sentiment wrapped around May like a gentle embrace, filling her chest with a warmth she hadn't expected. The idea of the garden apartment, its sunlight, its open space, Its view sparked something inside her that felt like possibility rather than resignation. Layla perked up instantly, clapping her hands with excitement. "Grandma, you can put all your sparkly things in there," she exclaimed, "and your pictures, and your special cups, and we can make a reading corner," and May laughed softly, interrupting the tumble of ideas with a gentle touch to Layla's hand. "Slow down, baby," she said, her voice warm with affection. "One idea at a time." But the enthusiasm in Layla's eyes made something inside May shift, soften, expand. It was the same spark she used to feel when planning new chapters of her own life. Back when change felt like an adventure rather than something to brace herself against. The feeling caught her off guard, but in a good way, like rediscovering a hidden part of herself she'd forgotten to miss. Darius leaned back slightly, watching her with cautious hope. "We only want it if it makes you happy," he murmured. "If it feels like a step forward, not a step away." The careful phrasing told May everything she needed to know. He wasn't trying to distance her or tuck her out of sight. He was trying to offer her comfort, independence, and closeness all at once. It was a delicate balance, and he was trying his best to walk it without missteps. May felt a tug in her chest, an echo of pride, of love, of tenderness toward the man her son had become. She reached for her tea again, letting the warmth steady her as she considered the offer. Not with fear but with curiosity, I think, May began slowly, letting the words settle into the air with gentle certainty. "I might like that." Her voice was soft but confident, carrying the quiet strength she hadn't realized she still possessed. "The sunlight would be nice. And the garden." She smiled at Layla. "And the sparkly things." Layla giggled, delighted beyond measure. Darius let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for hours, his relief palpable, his smile genuine. Nia reached over and squeezed his hand, her eyes shimmering with quiet joy. May felt warmth settle into her bones, a sense of movement, of forward motion, of reclaiming pieces of herself that had gone still for too long. The idea of the apartment felt like a beginning rather than an ending. The room seemed to brighten with May's acceptance, as though the very walls exhaled in shared relief. Layla bounced excitedly beside her, already imagining colors, curtains, and all the magical corners she believed her grandmother deserved. "We can make a reading nook under the window," she exclaimed, her voice bubbling with joy. "And put your favorite blankets there, and your special chair, and maybe even fairy lights." May laughed, touched by the child's boundless imagination, her heart warming at the thought of crafting a space that felt like her own again. She could almost picture it, the sun pooling across the floor in gentle ribbons, the breeze carrying in the scent of roses, the quiet hum of the house nearby but not overwhelming. It felt like a future she could reach for, rather than shy away from, a gentle invitation to live more fully. Darius leaned back into the couch cushions, tension easing from his shoulders as a smile slowly spread across his face. "If you want," he said, his tone careful but hopeful, "we can start moving things this weekend. No rush, though. We'll do it your way, at your pace." May nodded, appreciating the balance he was trying to strike, offering support without assuming control, guidance without overshadowing her choices. "My pace sounds good," she replied with a gentle grin. "My knees might not forgive me otherwise." They all laughed softly, the sound warm and unforced, creating a sense of harmony that felt richer than anything she'd felt in months. May realized she wasn't just accepting a new living space, she was accepting a new chapter, one shaped not by fear but by love. Nia reached across the coffee table, her fingers brushing lightly over May's hand in a gesture full of affection. "We'll make it beautiful," she promised. "Not because we're trying to impress anyone, just because you deserve a space that feels like joy." The sincerity in her voice touched May deeply. She felt gratitude swell within her, spreading warmth through her chest the way sunlight warmed the petals of the roses outside. "Thank you, baby," May whispered, her voice carrying years of unspoken appreciation, "for seeing me, to make room for me." Nia's eyes softened, her smile blooming with quiet emotion. "Your family," she said simply. "You don't take up space, you fill it." The statement struck something tender inside May, dissolving the last remnants of doubt she had been clutching unconsciously. As their conversation eased into a comfortable silence, May became aware of the soft ticking of the clock again, its steady rhythm marking the passing of time with gentle neutrality. She looked down at the scarf around her neck, the once painful gift that had now transformed into a symbol of healing and connection. She touched its soft threads thoughtfully, realizing how much meaning had been woven into it throughout the evening. What had begun as a careless remark had grown into a doorway, leading them into honesty, vulnerability, and renewed closeness. She felt gratitude for the journey, even the difficult parts, because they had brought her here to a place where she no longer felt like she was disappearing but returning to herself. Layla settled comfortably against her side once more, her tiny fingers curling around May's sleeve as if anchoring her in the moment. "Grandma," she whispered sleepily, "when you move to the garden room, can I help decorate?" May chuckled, brushing a gentle hand over the child's hair. "Of course you can," she said. "I'll need an expert to make it sparkle properly." Layla beamed, her eyes glimmering with pride before they slowly fluttered closed, exhaustion tugging her toward sleep. May held her close, savoring the warmth of the small body against her, the weight of unconditional love settling into her embrace. In that quiet moment, with her family around her and her future opening gently before her, she felt the steady pulse of belonging. The soft murmur of Darius and Nia's voices filled the background, gentle plans, ideas, and reassurances weaving themselves into the night air. May listened with a peaceful heart, letting their warmth envelope her. She felt no pressure, no fear, no lingering sting of earlier words, only the comforting sense of being seen, valued, and cherished. The scarf, the cake, the wishes, the conversation, they all formed pieces of a mosaic that showed her clearly that she hadn't been fading from their lives. She had simply been waiting to be invited back into the center of them, and now, she found herself stepping into that space with confidence, gratitude, and a quiet joy she hadn't felt in years. As the evening softly gave way to night, May looked around at the faces she loved, her son, her granddaughter, and felt a profound sense of peace settle through her. The day had begun with uncertainty, with a careless remark that stirred old insecurities, but it had unfolded into something richer, deeper, more healing than she could have ever expected. It reminded her that love wasn't flawless, but it was steadfast. And though years would continue to shape her, soften her, add lines to her skin and stories to her heart, she knew now fully, deeply, that she was not disappearing. She was loved, needed, and beautifully present. Morning arrived softly, slipping into May's room through the thin gap between the curtains like a quiet visitor, who knew the house well enough not to disturb it. The sunlight carried a warm gentleness, brushing across the floor in long golden strokes that made the wooden boards glow. May blinked awake in its soft embrace, the memory of last night still humming in her chest like a tender song she wasn't ready to stop listening to. She lay still for a moment, letting the warmth soak into her bones, feeling the weight of gratitude settle in every breath. It wasn't a grand happiness that filled her, but a steady, enduring kind, the kind that grew patiently, taking root in places she once thought had gone quiet. She touched the scarf draped over the chair beside her bed and smiled, remembering the way the night had unfolded into something unexpectedly healing. The house was still, save for the muted sounds of morning rituals drifting faintly through the walls, Darius's footsteps moving across the kitchen tile, the soft clink of a mug being set down, the low hum of the electric kettle. These were the rhythms of a home beginning its day, familiar and comforting. Threading through the quiet like threads in a tapestry, May rose slowly, careful of her joints but steady in her movement, and wrapped her robe around her shoulders before running a hand through her hair. Her reflection in the small mirror caught her Aja face lined with years, softened by experience, brightened by fresh purpose. She didn't flinch this time. Instead, she regarded herself with an affectionate curiosity, as though greeting a dear friend. She touched her cheek, tracing the faint creases near her eyes, each one a story she no longer felt compelled to hide. She walked into the living room, warmed by the scent of brewing tea and the subtle sweetness of something baking, cinnamon, perhaps, or honey. Sunlight rested across the sofa and coffee table, gilding the edges of last night's decorations, which had yet to be fully put away. The drawing Layla had made still sat in the center of the table, its bright stars shining in the morning light, making the crayon strokes shimmer with new life. May touched the paper gently, her fingers resting on the uneven lines as though absorbing the love pressed into them. The memory of Layla's sleepy voice, "Grandma sparkles when she's happy," echoed softly in her mind. The words warmed her more than the sunlight, settling deep into her heart with a comfort she hadn't realized she still needed. Darius looked up when she stepped into the kitchen, his face softening with a smile that reached all the way to his eyes. "Morning, Ma," he said, handing her a cup of tea already sweetened just the way she liked it. His voice carried an ease that hadn't been there before, the heaviness of worry replaced with something lighter, steadier. He leaned against the counter, watching her with a quiet attentiveness that told her he was still thinking about last night, still carrying its lessons gently. May took the cup, savoring its warmth against her palms, and sat at the table with a small sigh of contentment. "Morning, baby," she replied, her smile soft but genuine. The simple exchange felt rich with meaning, proof of the closeness they had reclaimed, the emotional ground they had finally dared to reach together after months of drifting. Naya entered next, her hair still wrapped in a soft scarf, her movements graceful even in the unhurried rhythm of morning. She gave May a warm kiss on the cheek before pulling a tray from the oven, filling the kitchen with the fragrant scent of freshly baked bread. "I made your favorite," she said, setting the tray down on a cooling rack. "Thought we could start the day with something comforting?" May's heart softened even further at the gesture, the thoughtfulness reminding her once again of how deeply she was cherished here. She touched Nia's hand lightly in thanks, the connection brief but full of affection. The morning felt brighter now, filled, not with the weight of aging or fear of fading, but with the gentle promise of belonging, of being woven into the fabric of her family's life in ways both ordinary and profound. May tore a small piece of the warm bread and let it melt on her tongue, savoring the gentle sweetness that carried echoes of childhood breakfasts and long ago mornings when she baked for Darius before school. Those memories surfaced not with longing but with a tender sense of continuity, as though life had folded back on itself just enough to remind her that she had always been part of something larger than her fears. The sunlight poured across the table in wide, comforting swaths, illuminating the steam rising from her tea and casting a soft glow over the room. She looked at Darius and Nia moving around the kitchen in their quiet morning rhythm, their gestures easy and familiar, and she felt her heart expand again. This house, this space, this family, they were not simply caring for her, they were inviting her into their lives with a depth she had not fully allowed herself to feel until now. Layla shuffled sleepily into the kitchen moments later, rubbing her eyes with two tiny fists as she climbed onto May's lap with practiced ease. "Morning, Grandma," she murmured, resting her head against May's chest. May wrapped her arms around the little girl, breathing in the soft scent of shampoo and warm blankets. "Morning, baby," she whispered, kissing the top of her head. Layla sighed contentedly, sinking deeper into the embrace, as though she had been waiting for it all night. Darius chuckled softly from across the table. "She woke up asking if you already started moving to the garden room," he said with a teasing smile. Layla lifted her head just enough to add, "I want to help with the sparkles." May laughed gently, smoothing Layla's hair as her heart filled with affection. "We'll need plenty of sparkles," she agreed. Nia pulled out a small notepad and slid it onto the table beside May. "I thought we could start planning the layout today," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "Just ideas, nothing rushed." She flipped to a blank page and handed May a pen. The gesture felt ceremonial, as though she were offering not just paper but possibility itself. May hesitated for a moment, surprised by the flutter of anticipation rising in her chest. Then she placed the pen gently between her fingers and allowed herself to imagine the space, the sunlight streaming through the windows, the reading corner under the sill, the soft rugs that would warm her feet in winter. She began sketching simple shapes, tentative lines that grew more confident with each passing moment. Darius leaned over her shoulder, offering quiet suggestions, while Layla pointed excitedly at every drawn window, declaring where fairy lights should go. As they planned together, May noticed something subtle but powerful. There was no trace of hesitation in their voices, no tone of obligation or pity. They weren't making space for her because they felt they had to. They were making space for her because they wanted her close, woven into their days, not as a responsibility but as a source of connection and love. She felt the truth of it settle deeper within her than words could express. For so long, she had worried that aging meant drifting into the background, becoming a quiet shadow in other people's stories. But here, in this bright kitchen filled with laughter and morning light, she realized she was an essential thread, one that added depth, memory, steadiness, and warmth to the fabric of their home. The realization brought a soft sting to her eyes, but it was a tender kind of ache, the kind born from feeling deeply seen. Darius reached for her hand as she drew the outline of the garden outside the apartment windows. His touch was gentle, steady, full of an unspoken promise. "We'll make it perfect," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of sincerity. "Not just comfortable, perfect." May looked at him, seeing not just her son but a man stepping fully into a kind of emotional maturity he had long avoided. The vulnerability they had shared last night had shifted something fundamental between them, replacing old misunderstandings with new intention. She squeezed his hand, her smile both proud and grateful. "Perfect, sounds nice," she murmured. Nia nodded in agreement, her eyes soft with affection. "It will be," she said simply. And somehow, May believed it, not because perfection was easy, but because love, given space to grow, could shape even difficult changes into something beautiful. The morning gradually softened into late morning light, the hours moving with an easy gentleness as plans for the garden apartment took shape on the notepad. May found herself sketching small corners she had not thought about in years, places for keepsakes. For books stacked in uneven yet loving towers, for the rocking chair she had used when Darius was a baby. Layla insisted on drawing tiny stars in each corner of the paper, declaring them sparkle spots, and May allowed the child's enthusiasm to spill across the page without correction. Each messy star, each swirling line, felt like a reminder that new beginnings didn't need to be perfect. They only needed to be honest. The sunlight streaming through the kitchen window warmed her hands as she worked, and the familiar sense of home tea bread, and the faint trace of cinnamon wrapped around her like a comforting shawl. Darius hovered nearby, offering suggestions with an uncharacteristic gentleness that made May's chest tighten with affection. "Maybe we could build shelves along the wall," he said, tapping the edge of the paper thoughtfully, "for your photo albums, and the figurines you collected." He winced a little as he added, "I know I used to complain about dusting them, but..." May chuckled softly, finishing the sentence for him. "You want to see them again?" He nodded, a shy grin tugging at his mouth. "Yeah, they're part of home." The admission touched her deeply. For years, she had put away parts of her self-interests, hobbies, pieces of her identity out of worry that they took up too much space. Hearing her son invite them back into the light stirred a warmth she hadn't realized she'd been craving. She reached out and brushed his hand gently. "We'll put them where everyone can enjoy them," she said. Nia leaned over the table, pointing to a blank spot near one of May's sketched windows. "And maybe a small table for your plants," she suggested. "I know you've missed gardening since the move." May inhaled sharply, surprised by how deeply the suggestion resonated. She had indeed missed tending to her plants, the careful watering, the steady growth, the life blooming quietly under her hands. "I would like that," she admitted, her voice touched with emotion. Nia smiled softly, her eyes warm. "Then we'll make it happen." Layla clapped excitedly, misinterpreting the moment. "Grandma can grow sparkly flowers," she exclaimed. May laughed, pulling the child into a gentle hug. "Maybe not sparkly," she said, "but definitely beautiful." The room brimmed with laughter again, light and unforced, weaving itself into the morning like sunlight through leaves. May glanced down at the scarf, resting loosely around her neck. Feeling its familiar softness as she adjusted it lightly, she thought of how the day before had begun with insecurity, with a careless remark that struck a wound she didn't know was still tender. And now, less than 24 hours later, she stood on the edge of something new, a chapter shaped not by fear of fading, but by recognition, by choice, by love. She touched the edge of the scarf, running her fingers along the threads, and felt a quiet empowerment rising within her. It was remarkable, she realized, how pain could open doors if met with honesty. How even strained moments could become opportunities for connection when approached with grace. She wasn't hiding behind the scarf anymore. She was simply wearing a gift, given awkwardly but with good intentions, a reminder of how far they'd come. As noon approached, the kitchen filled with a soft buzz of activity as Nia began preparing lunch and Darius stepped outside to check the garden apartment, wanting to ensure the space was ready for imagination to become reality. May watched them through the window for a moment, her son walking with purpose, his shoulders lighter than they had been in months. Nia humming as she chopped vegetables, moving with a steadiness that seemed to anchor the house itself. The familiarity of these rhythms soothed May in a way she hadn't expected. She felt herself becoming part of the movement again, not observing from the edges but woven into the flow of their days. Layla tugged her sleeve, eager for attention, pulling her back into the moment with a giggle and a mischievous glint in her eyes. May smiled, allowing herself to be drawn in, letting the fullness of the home settle gently around her. She followed Layla into the living room, where the morning sunlight had shifted just enough to cast a warm glow across the couch and carpet. The child rummaged through a basket of toys before emerging triumphantly with a worn puzzle box. "Can we do it together?" she asked, holding the box out with both hands. May felt a smile bloom across her face. "Of course we can," she said, lowering herself onto the rug with care. The puzzle pieces spilled out in a colorful scatter, and Layla immediately began sorting them into corners and edges, her concentration fierce. May joined her, savoring the simplicity of the shared task, the sweetness of being fully present with her granddaughter. Piece by piece, the image began to form a picture of a bright garden, full of flowers and sunlight. May's heart swelled at the symbolism, feeling the gentle nudge of hope shaping itself into something steady and real. May placed another puzzle piece gently into its place, Watching the image of the garden slowly come together beneath their hands, the picture bloomed with soft colors, pinks, yellows, gentle greens that mirrored the very roses growing outside in the morning sun. Layla leaned forward eagerly, her small fingers darting between pieces with practiced enthusiasm. "This one goes here," she declared triumphantly, fitting a bright corner piece into the growing mosaic. May chuckled, admiring the child's confidence. "You're getting good at this," she said, brushing a loose strand of hair from Layla's forehead. The puzzle felt symbolic, small pieces scattered and then carefully reassembled, emerging into something whole and beautiful. It mirrored her heart, she thought, quietly rebuilt through moments of honesty, tenderness, and the gentle work of love. The connection made her chest swell with warmth. Darius stepped back into the house just then, his footsteps light against the floorboards. He paused in the doorway, watching May and Layla on the rug with a soft expression that carried pride, relief, and an affection he no longer bothered to hide behind gruffness. "It looks good," he said, referring not to the puzzle but to the way they fit together on the floor. May calm and radiant, Layla bright and joyful. He walked over and crouched beside them, picking up a stray piece and examining it with exaggerated seriousness. He murmured. "I think this one goes." He placed it deliberately in a completely incorrect spot. Layla gasped, scandalized. "Daddy, that doesn't even match." She snatched the piece playfully and fixed it in its rightful place. Darius laughed, the sound warm and full, the kind of laugh May had missed more than she realized. Nia appeared moments later with 3 glasses of cool lemonade, the condensation beading on the sides like delicate pearls. She set them on the coffee table and settled onto the couch, watching the puzzle with the quiet delight of someone who found beauty in small domestic moments. "It's almost done," she observed, her voice soft and encouraging. May nodded, placing another piece that completed the outline of a rose. "It's beautiful," she said, though she wasn't only talking about the puzzle. She glanced at Darius, then at Naya, then at Layla beside her, and felt the fullness of her life with them settled gently into place. The apartment by the garden suddenly seemed less like a plan and more like a promise, one that stretched forward with possibility, rather than fear. She could almost picture herself there already, sunlight warming her hands as she read or tended to plants, laughter drifting through the hallway from the main house as the final piece clicked into place. Layla clapped her hands in celebration, her joy filling the room like a burst of light. "We did it," she exclaimed, throwing her arms around May's neck with a squeeze so full of love it momentarily stole May's breath. May hugged her back, letting the embrace linger, her heart swelling with a tenderness that felt both steady and powerful. "Yes, baby," she murmured. "We did it together." Darius leaned back on his heels, taking in the completed puzzle with a satisfied nod. "Looks perfect," he said, "just like your new apartment will." May met his eyes, seeing the sincerity there, the desire not just to care for her but to share life with her. It was a quiet revelation, one that softened her breath and brought a small smile to her lips. She felt gratitude rise again, warm, expansive, and deeply rooted. Nia reached for her glass and took a sip of lemonade, her gaze drifting thoughtfully toward the window that overlooked the garden. "You know," she said gently, "we could plant something special there for you. Something new. A flower you choose?" May's eyebrows lifted in soft surprise. "For the apartment?" she asked. Nia nodded. "Something that marks the beginning of this chapter." The idea stirred something deep within May, an image of her hands in the soil again, nurturing life, watching growth happen not despite time but because of it. She thought of the roses she used to tend, of the lavender she once adored, of the marigolds that bloomed stubbornly even on the hardest days. "I think I'd like that," she said softly. "I'd like to plant something that grows with me." The room fell quiet for a moment, not with emptiness but with shared meaning. May looked down at the finished puzzle one more time, her fingers tracing the delicate petals captured in cardboard and ink. It struck her that beginnings didn't always roar into existence. Sometimes they unfolded gently, like sunlight creeping across a floor, like a puzzle piece slipping into place, like a seed finally ready for planting. She lifted her gaze toward her family, each face carrying its own warmth, its own hope for her, and felt her heart steady, full and certain. She was not stepping into isolation. She was stepping deeper into connection, into purpose, into the gentle rhythm of days shared with people who loved her fiercely. It was a moment she wanted to hold, to remember, to plant like a seed in her heart and let it bloom for the rest of her days. The afternoon sunlight drifted lazily through the windows as May rose from the rug, her movements slow but steady, guided by Layla's small hand holding hers. They approached the garden door together, drawn by the gentle pull of possibility waiting outside. When May stepped onto the porch, the familiar scent of roses wrapped around her, warm and nostalgic. The garden stretched before her in quiet invitation, its beds lined with soft earth and clusters of blooms swaying gently in the breeze. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth on her skin, the steady hum of life in the air, and the soft echo of her heartbeat aligning with the rhythm of the world she loved. For the first time in a long while, she felt not older, or slower, or diminished, but rooted, present, alive in the unfolding moment. Darius joined her on the porch, carrying a small terracotta pot cradled carefully in his hands. The soil inside was fresh and dark, cradling a tiny sprout just beginning to unfurl its first leaves. "I thought we could start with this," he said, his voice gentle as he offered it to her. "It's nothing fancy, just something new, something yours." May accepted the pot with both hands, marveling at the tender green beginning within it. "What kind of plant is it?" she asked softly. Darius smiled, the expression warm and unguarded. "It's a camellia," he said. "Your favorite?" I remembered. The simple statement struck her deeply, stirring quiet tears she didn't bother to hide. She ran a fingertip lightly along the rim of the pot, as though absorbing the promise hidden within the fragile sprout. It was a beginning she hadn't known she needed until now. Nia stepped beside them, resting her hand lightly on May's back in a gesture both grounding and affectionate. "We can plant it wherever you like," she murmured. "Near your new windows, maybe, so you can watch it grow every day." May nodded, touched by the thoughtfulness woven into every detail. She imagined waking each morning to sunlight filtering through the leaves, watching blossoms appear with the changing seasons, tending to something that grew alongside her. The imagery filled her with a sense of renewal, soft but powerful. Layla tugged on her sleeve, pointing eagerly toward a patch of soil near the garden path. "Right there, Grandma, that spot gets the sparkles in the afternoon." May laughed, understanding the child's language. Sparkles meant sunbeams dancing across petals. The kind of magic only children could see so easily. "That sounds perfect," May replied, squeezing Layla's hand. Together they walked toward the chosen patch of earth, each step feeling like a small affirmation. May knelt slowly, the soft ground welcoming her as she dug her fingers gently into the soil. The earth was warm, rich, familiar. She had missed this sensation more than she realized. Darius knelt beside her, carefully loosening the roots from the pot while Layla hovered nearby, offering encouragement in excited whispers. Nia watched from behind, her presence steady and reassuring. "Take your time," she said softly. "We're right here." May felt a swell of gratitude at the words, her heart expanding with the realization that she didn't have to face any chapter alone. She placed the young camellia into its new home, pressing soil around its base with tender hands, as though anchoring a part of herself into the earth with it. When the plant stood securely, May sat back on her heels and wiped her hands, her breath catching with a quiet sense of triumph. The camellia's leaves trembled lightly in the breeze, as if greeting the world for the first time. It was small, delicate, but full of promise, just like the chapter unfolding before her. Darius placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip warm steady. "You did good, Ma," he said softly. May leaned into the touch, allowing herself to absorb the affection she used to brush aside. "We all did," she answered, her voice warm with emotion. Nia wrapped an arm around Darius, smiling down at May with gentle pride. Layla clapped her hands gleefully, declaring, "Now Grandma's plant can grow sparkles too." The simple proclamation made May laugh, the sound light and unburdened as the breeze rustled through the garden. May felt the moment settle into her heart, like a story she would carry forever. She rose slowly, supported by Darius's hand, and looked out over the sunlit space that would soon become an extension of her home. The garden apartment no longer felt like a step away from life, but an invitation into a fuller, richer part of it. She imagined mornings with tea by the window, afternoons tending to her plants, evenings filled with laughter drifting in from the main house. Time would continue its steady march, but she no longer feared fading with it. She had rediscovered her place, not at the edges, but woven deeply into the center of the family she loved. As she stood there surrounded by sunlight, soil, and the people who anchored her, May felt a quiet certainty bloom within her. Aging did not mean disappearing. Love, spoken truthfully and received with grace, had the power to transform even the most fragile moments into beginnings. The camellia rustled beside her, its small leaves catching the light like tiny blessings. May reached out and touched one gently, a smile softening her entire face. She knew, with unwavering clarity, that she was still growing too, still blooming in ways she had not expected, still belonging in the world her family crafted with her and for her.